Добрый день, уважаемые дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of our meeting, dear friends. I am sincerely welcoming you at the St. Petersburg Forum. And today, in this very representative audience, I would like to share with you our plans of reform in Russia and share with you my vision of the situation in the global economy. I would also like to say a few words about the just finished G20 meeting and share with you information about the way this work proceeded. This is the forum which is attended by the countries which account for about 90% of the global GDP. As to the common appraisal which sounded in the debate, the situation in the global economy is of a concern. And for those gathered here, I believe there is nothing unexpected in it. The disbalances, as well as the debts, are quite a lot in terms of what has been accumulated. And you know about the situation in the leading European countries. In Germany, it's 81%. In France, it's 86%. And in the United States, 104%, and even more than that in Japan. All of this together undermines the trust on the part of the businesses and creates the nervous sentiment amongst investors. Alongside with the deficit in finance and budget, unfortunately, we also see the shortage of resolute action. We see how many principal and obvious steps are stranded under the cold feet of the political party and lobbying contradictions because of the current political situations and the current political agendas in the leading global economies, and half measures only further exacerbate the situation. Risks are growing in Europe. At the exchanges in Europe, there is a growing mistrust in the financial stability of the major European economies. The core countries in the Eurozone, so far, unfortunately, were not able to fight back the sliding into the new phase of recession, and there is no unanimity amongst them in terms of the way out of the crisis, although I do hope that during the forthcoming summit meetings in the Eurozone, such consolidated decisions will be made. The crisis as a phenomenon so far hasn't been localized, and it is quite logical that the manifestation of the slowdown in the business activity and the loss of dynamics are obviously seen amongst the leading economies. But at the same time, the results of the Greek elections, the choice of the Greek people, the resolute action in terms of the European Union and some of the leading European nations in terms of instilling financial discipline and eliminating the disbalances as their economies do make us cautiously optimistic. Russia believes that there is a need for an urgent, well-coordinated action to clear up and make the global finance recover, and to put into place an unseverable cord which will connect them to the real manufacturing sector and its result. But at the same time, it is valid and justified to raise the issue about strengthening the role of the so-called emerging economies and the so-called new economic nations in identifying the steps which will define the nature of the global economic order. This is something that the BRICS countries summit debated, which occurred upon the framework of the G20, Brazil, India, Russia, and South Africa and China. These countries not only confirmed their readiness to assist in implementing the stabilization measures to strengthen the stability of the global economy, but also undertook towards that end specific action and committed themselves additionally to allocate to IMF about $75 billion US. Quite naturally, we wish to be able to have a say in how this money is going to be disposed of, and we believe that from just talk, one should switch over to realistic working on the IMF reforms and other international financial institutions, to the kind of reform which would take into account the new economic landscape. And overall, one should talk about producing renewed and viable rules of the international trading and mutual investments, about the real resolution of the issue of sustainable development, certainly including the energy security. I should underscore that all of these themes we intend to make topical and actively promote them in the course of the forthcoming Russian chairmanship in G20 in 2013. And we have proposed to our partners to get together specifically here in a year's time in St. Petersburg. But on a larger scale of things, the time has come for the G20 to fully adopt the burden of effective leadership. It means that G20 should not turn itself into yet another elite club, which is taking care only of its members. Selfishness and behind-the-scenes dealing won't add to stability and trust. The G20 is called upon to become the kind of place where fair game rules are being worked out for the sake of the stable development of the whole of the global economy. The global nature of the world economy, when everybody depends upon each other, currently calls for the global nature of accountability, and in the first place, certainly in the case of the leading global economies. And that also goes for the countries which issue reserve currencies, but simply put, control the printing press, and as well as the nations who act as the main holders of the golden currency reserves and consequently provide stability for the international financial system, and certainly the nations which have the biggest market capacity as well as the biggest natural resources, and consequently in many ways define the overall trend in the global growth. We not only have to act together and within the common policy framework, but also clearly see how the decisions made upon the national level will affect the global scale of things. Here I would like to note that Russia is guided specifically by this responsible approach. For example, despite all the well-known problems in the Eurozone, we hold a significant share of our international reserves, specifically in euro, and do not undertake any unilateral steps which may exacerbate an already difficult situation in the European currency. We are aware that in what the Eurozone leaders do today in many ways would define the well-being of the rest of the world, and therefore we shall support our European partners based upon the unity and commonness of our long-term objectives. Moreover, I believe that we together should learn lessons from the current situation in Europe and upon a global scale propose the kind of mechanisms which would prevent the repetition of similar situation in other regions of the world. So overall, an effective leadership, a responsible line of behavior today is in the first place realistic decisions and the kind of action which could win trust. This is a well-balanced fiscal policy, control over the sovereign debt, financial discipline. One should be able to tell the truth and take the responsibility. And unrelentless financial speculation and the petty populism on the part of the politicians are similarly dangerous. The bubbles or empty talk should not be allowed, neither in politics nor in economics. And finally, leadership is all about being able to find the fundamental way out of the global stability and stagnation, to propose and execute the long-term strategy of the development. Who does that first will definitely achieve a strategic advantage. The leaders who are not capable of achieving respective results won't be able to give their citizens the hope for a better future, for a good employment, and shall risk plunging their countries into the abyss of political and social instability and different sorts of conflicts. Therefore, a stable development today is the topical theme for a national agenda of every nation in the world. That is the foundation for global security, for a normal development of the whole system of international affairs. Dear ladies and gentlemen, here in Russia, we have produced a whole program of large-scale reforms which have received a very broad public support, and I believe that its implementation is the top priority in my office as the President of Russia. Now, which are our objectives? This is strengthening the natural competitive advantages that Russia has, the development of the new opportunities in the global economy. This is a stable development of the country. This is an effective government servicing the human being and the society, the law enforcement system and the judicial system, which enjoy an undoubted trust on the part of the people. And we hope that that will create new opportunities for individual development for the Russians. A new quality of life would improve and create the modern workplaces, would improve the system of education and healthcare, would help in resolving the housing problems. For the businesses, this is the best possible environment for investing, to run one's own business, to set up new companies and manufacturing sites, free and honest competition, and the open range for innovation, and specifically the principles of our economic policy, something that I wanted to say a few words about. Amongst other things, I believe it is proper to repeat some of the statements that have been made before, simply because today the businesses, investors, need to feel that the government is consistent and predictable by maintaining continuity and without revising the already stated objectives. Of course, everything that we're talking about is easy to say than do, and with this regard I would like to underscore yet again that of a particular priority there remains and was an ability to maintain macroeconomic stability. This kind of a policy enabled us to achieve certain results already. For example, inflation during the past 4 years has considerably went down. It is still quite high comparing ourselves to the developed economies. In Russia last year it was 6.1%, which is still a lot. But I would like to draw attention to the fact that during the 4 years in question, it went down more than twice. 4 years ago, inflation was here above 13%. Last year, like I said, 6.1%. And this is the minimal level in Russia during the past 20 years. And by the start of June this year, inflation was less than 4% in an annual term. The sovereign debt in Russia is the lowest one amongst the G8, G20 and the BRICS countries, and as of May 1st, 2012, it amounted to 9.2%. And at the same time, the external debt of Russia is just about 2.5%. I would similarly note that Russia is one of the 3 countries in G20 which runs a deficit-free budget. And this is something that I would mention yet again. But at the same time, the current macroeconomic indicators are quite acceptable and good ones, and this is no reason for us to become complacent. We can clearly see serious long-term and mid-term challenges that our economy is facing. This country's economy hasn't been yet diversified. A significant part of the value-added share is being created in the natural resource sectors. Still large is a share of the non-competitive, old manufacturing facilities. A high level of Russia's dependence upon the oil prices remains. We should reduce this dangerously high bar of non-oil and gas deficit. It's like I've just mentioned during the G20 meeting, is the Achilles' heel of this country's economy. In the time of high global volatility, such an economy is very vulnerable and can be susceptible to significant risks. That is why Russia requires not only a deficit-free budget, but the kind of a budget which has a sufficient tensile strength margin, which can be dependent not just upon the oil and gas revenues. It should be based upon non-resource revenues, and in the second place, from the sale of the hydrocarbons. Therefore, very soon, there's going to be a new budget rule put in place with a kind of rationale for the amount of our liabilities, the fiscal expenditures, and the long-term investment programs that the government is involved could not be dependent upon the current oil prices. As far as the windfall profits are concerned, they will be used to replenish the reserves in the first place. Simultaneously, the central bank shall continue its flexible exchange policy, it already makes a lot of a contribution to lessen the dependence of our manufacturing economy and our producers from the external market environment. It reduces the interest in the speculative kind of transacting and deters the inflation. Please note, we will not step away from the principle of the free movement of capital, and we're not going to introduce any sorts of limitations here. We're very well aware how important is the certainty for investors in this issue, the ones who plan to invest their capital into Russia. I would like to draw your attention, dear colleagues, that even during the most difficult period of the crisis back in 2009, the government of Russia did not limit the outflow of capital. We indeed lost a significant share of resources, but we acted upon the long-term interests of the Russian economy, and the long-term interests require trust amongst investors, and we intend to pursue the same policy in the future. The past period demonstrated that any clumsy and crude decisions in the economy in terms of their administrative nature don't work. In order to be able to effectively resist the economic turbulences, the government and financial authorities have to have a whole array of anti-crisis instruments, and certainly a significant share of domestic sovereign resources which can be utilized in any situation. And in this regard, I shall remind us of the situation of the last autumn, where banks were confronted by the liquidity crunch and the joint activities by our financial authorities. The Ministry of Finance and the Russian Central Bank made it possible to make the Russian banking system work seamlessly. Just the Ministry of Finance very quickly was able to provide the credit institutions of the countries of more than $30 billion of liquidity without tapping into the Russian reserve funds, which are quite solid and big. The international reserves of the central bank are the third ones in terms of the size in the world. As of June 8th of this year, they amounted to over $512 billion. Apart from that, we've got the reserve funds under the management of the Russian government, then the reserve fund for an emergency response, which in dollar equivalent amounts to more than $60 billion, and the sovereign wealth fund, out of which we support our pension system, which amounts to additional $85.5 billion. I would like to underscore that today is at the disposal of Russia. There are sufficient reserves in the whole line of mechanisms of an anti-crisis emergency response mechanisms, including the provision of subordinated loans, government guarantees, the consumer demand stimulus packages, and support for employment. So this whole arsenal has been tested in real work and has proven its efficiency during the period of 08-09. And we're ready to quickly and fully utilize it in case certain negative situations evolve in the global economy. But in the meantime, we understand that the probable crisis could turn out to be a different one in terms of the longevity as well as the possible aftermath. So I believe it is quite vital to set up a fully scaled system of predicting and managing risks. This is the kind of system that we're going to develop. And back in the days of being the head of the cabinet, I asked my colleagues to think about creating such a system, and the new cabinet shall continue this work. The majority of the recent crises came into Russia from the outside, and these are the factors that we certainly couldn't control. Well, in the first place, a very proper system of risk mitigation makes it possible to minimize the consequences of the external quakes, and secondly, doesn't allow for crisis to happen because of the domestic reasons, because of the accumulation of internal disbalances, which, in the case of the Russia's growing economy, is of principal importance. Dear ladies and gentlemen, strengthening the potential of the set of measures of rapid response, we simultaneously believe that the fundamental decisions can be made in the area of building new economy. The economy which could be stable to different shocks, the kind of economy which could demonstrate high rates of growth against very difficult external environment. Russia's GDP growth, considering the results of 2011, was 4.3%, which is the highest rates of growth amongst the major European economies and one of the highest rates amongst the leading global economies. In front of us, amongst the major economies, only China and India. Now, in as far as unemployment is concerned, another very important indicator, not only of the social well-being, but the economy itself. In May, it went down in Russia to the level of less than 5.4%, which is much lower than before the crisis. I shall remind us that in the very same Europe, unemployment is at 11%, which is the maximum figure during the past 16 years. Although in Russia, not everything is so good looking, because although the unemployment is at a low level, like I said, 5.4%, but in between the regions, it looks differently. Let's say in the south of Russia, in the northern Caucasus, in some of the republics, it is still too high. But generally, throughout the whole country, I shall repeat, this is the kind of indicator which is looking good. But this kind of a low unemployment means that the extensive opportunities and resources to grow because of the free capacities and available labor force have been completely exhausted. And the future development is possible only upon the basis of a high investment activity, high labor productivity, the modernization of the currently existing, and the creation of new manufacturing facilities and workplaces. Now, what are the landmarks that we're going to target? By 2020, in Russia, they should be established or modernized amongst the currently existing workplaces in the overall number of 25 million. We should displace an archaic, ineffective employment from our national economy. Only that will be the way that we will be able to meet the requirements of our citizens for highly paid and contemporary conditions of work, to propose new opportunities in social future, both for the current employees and the future employees, meaning the graduates of our technical colleges and higher educational institutions. The economic effect from these millions of new workplaces would mean the growth of the labor productivity at least 1.5 times by 2015. This is a very complex task, but we must set ourselves ambitious goals, and only then we will be able to consistently move to the kind of levels that we need to attain. The new workplaces would mean principally new structure and sustainability and stability in the economy that would be improving the share of the high-tech industries in the country's GDP, the minimum 1.3 times by 2018. And at the same time, Russia should declare itself as an exporter of innovative products and services. The new workplaces are being created, certainly, through investments. And we need to grow this volume by 2018 up to 27% of the GDP. Now, is it big or small? I believe that this is an absolutely realistic objective, meaning to say that today we've got 20%, so we need to raise this level by 7%. And certainly, when we talk about investments, we first of all mean private investments. We are fully aware that we need to propose to investors an exclusive kind of a term and condition and fight for these investments in order for an investor to choose in favor of Russia. That is why the key issue of the government policy, we believe, to be a creation not only of a favorable, but in full sense of this word, the better, the best possible competitive environment. And by the end of the current decade, Russia should enter the top 20 countries with the best possible and comfortable business environment. This is also a very difficult, ambitious goal, considering our position today. There are already available very specific roadmaps to eliminate administrative barriers in such areas as getting connected to power supplies in the area of construction, when going through customs clearance, when registering foreign trade transactions, when incorporating a company, when submitting your tax return. And I would like to particularly underscore that this is the work we do together with the leading business associations in the country as part of the so-called the National Business Initiative. And the results of our common efforts are, undoubtedly, should not be put to waste. From the practical implementation of these roadmaps, a lot shall depend. And there is a need now to have a particular control, both on the part of the government as well as on the part of the public and the businesses themselves. That is specifically why an important decision was made to set up a special commission to implement this national business initiative.
It will include representatives of Russian and international business and heads of ministries and government agencies. But as a former politician once said, if you want to ruin something, create a commission. We understand that, and we bear this in mind. We understand that it takes time to perfect a system of state services for business, whereas current problems when businessmen face violations of their rights, bureaucratic pressure, corruption, administrative barriers, etc., need to be addressed even today. And that's why also in consultation with the business community, we are creating in Russia a new special institution, Ombudsman for the rights of businessmen, both Russian and foreign. I want to emphasize this. He will have the power to defend the interests of business in court, to suspend normative acts of government, and within those powers will be able to go to court to seek suspension of specific actions of government officials. Of course, legislation will have to be adopted to that effect. I see that we have here in the hall members of the State Duma, and I request that they take appropriate decisions. Following consultations with the business community, we have decided to appoint as Federal Ombudsman for Business Mr. Boris Titov, who is president of Delovaya Rossiya Business Russia organization. We conducted a kind of poll, and practically all members of the business community named among the candidates Mr. Titov, and the president's decree will be signed in the near future. The Office of the Federal Ombudsman for Business will start functioning in the coming weeks. I think that the Office of the General Prosecutor will also have to give special attention to this area so that the Ombudsman could work with the law enforcement bodies directly. Also, during my discussions with businessmen, they often complained about unfair conditions of competition because of the excessive presence of government in the economy. They complain that state companies have preferences, that they act outside the framework of rules of competition, that they occupy the space in which private business should be. Our position of principle is that the government will take consistent steps to withdraw from a number of sectors and assets. The plan for the privatization of federal property has been approved and will be implemented. Similar privatization plans should be adopted at the regional level. But let me emphasize, first of all, that this should be a kind of privatization having nothing to do with the practice of loans for shares and other dubious schemes that were used in the 1990s, when state assets created by the previous generations of our citizens were acquired as a result of closeness to the government, to the administration, very often at a very, very low price, and very often at the expense of the government, with the government money. And as a result, this distorted entrepreneurial motivation, it had an immoralizing impact on the business community. It created systemic problems, including problems at the psychological and mental level. It is difficult to expect respect for property improperly acquired. And let me recognize that recent steps show that since that time, since the old times, little has changed. I regret to say that, and so it is clear to us that the new privatization must be one that would be accepted by the Russian society. It should be understandable, honest, and fair. It should be based on open, competitive sale of government state assets to the best buyer at a real price. Only if we follow all these principles can we have adequate budget revenue and create effective property owner who will not look for reselling the property, but who will want to develop production, to increase production. And it's very important to have public respect for the institution of private property. for values such as economic freedom and business initiative. It is on the basis of absolute public trust in these values that we will be able to create effective guarantees of inviolability and protection of private property, and to qualitatively change the work of the law enforcement and judiciary system, to do everything necessary for them to defend the interests of good faith economic players rather than be a tool for pressure on business. Honest and fair privatization, breaking the link between the government and property, will also be a real and strong anti-corruption measure. Corruption, without exaggeration, today, unfortunately, is the biggest threat to our development. The risks here are much bigger than the oscillations in oil prices. The people and the businesses are tired of routine corruption, of kickbacks in government bodies and in state companies. This is something that we need to address. This is something we've been emphasizing for some time. This is a difficult problem, but we cannot ignore it. We cannot pretend that the problem does not exist. We need to discuss it, and we need to look for tools to address this problem. We will try to attract to government service people with a different kind of motivation, professional and effective managers. Privatization is needed in order to shape a new modern structure of the economy, to reduce the risks associated with inefficient management, to create equal conditions for competition. Let me emphasize, state capitalism is not our goal, but privatization must not result in the emergence of private monopolies in place of state monopolies. Without healthy competition, market economy can be as rotten as the command economy. Without honest domestic competition, without the rule of law, without truth and justice in relations between business and the state, we cannot become truly competitive internationally. Competition in politics and in economics is the main engine of development. Therefore, I am asking the government of the Russian Federation to seriously review the practice of the application of anti-monopoly legislation and support for competition. We should do this in close contact with the economic players, with the businesses, and we certainly will welcome the participation of international partners in privatization deals. But we need really serious strategic investors that bring to Russia modern technologies, production experience, and large export orders. I would like to say that positive experience exists of working with foreign investors, and over the past few years, for example, in power generation, we have been able to take important steps together with international investors, and despite the fact that after the acquisition of our power generation assets, the world faced the crisis, the global financial and economic crisis, all of our foreign investors who invested tens of billions of dollars in our generation capacity acted very courageously, very professionally, and I hope that this joint work with the Russian state and regional and federal authorities will continue not only in power generation but in other areas as well. Ladies and gentlemen, today, in the context of global instability, the quality and nature of investment is particularly important. Portfolio investment can quickly heat up the market and make it very dynamic, but at the same time, they are always susceptible to short-term factors. The enthusiasm of investors toward rapidly developing and profitable markets can, within days, be replaced with pessimism and outflow of capitals. We in Russia have faced such a situation a number of times. Therefore, we want to emphasize direct investment, the capital that invests in long-term strategic projects. Today, Russia ranks 8th in direct foreign investment. In 2011, almost $53 billion were invested in Russia. The rate of investment growth was 22%, but of course this is not enough if we are to implement our plans, and we understand that. Let me note that according to the surveys conducted by respected international companies, the number of long-term investors who intend to increase their investment in Russia has grown over the past 6 months, almost twofold. In October 2011, 25% of those surveyed declared their intent. 25% of the 150 company leaders and investment funds announced their intention to increase investment in Russia, whereas in April 2012, already 48% announced this intention. This is an almost twofold increase, and we will certainly support and welcome this. A year ago, here at the St. Petersburg Forum, Dmitry Medvedev announced the creation of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. Let me inform you, ladies and gentlemen, that this body has been created and is working. An expert advisory council has been created for this foundation, including leading representative of the global investment community. The first deals have been done in the amount of $1 billion. Out of that amount, $800 million are monies from international investors. Practically all international capital centers, the Middle East, China, Europe, United States, and Australia, are working with this fund. And 2 weeks ago, during my visit to China, we completed work to create the Russian-Chinese Investment Fund that will manage from $1 to $4 billion. We will also continue work to create in Moscow an international financial center. We are under no illusion here. We are realistic, but at the same time, let me note that the Russian financial system has been evolving quite rapidly over the past years, despite the problems that are currently experienced by many American and European financial institutions. We have in Russia a growing accessibility of financial services for businesses and for individuals. There's been a 43% growth in loans to individuals and 30% growth in mortgage loans. As of June 1st, 2012, loans to individuals amounted to 6.4 trillion rubles, or 10% of the GDP, and loans to businesses have grown by 25%, and they amount to 34% of the GDP. Let me note that we fully understand the risks associated with this growth of credit. Over-leveraging of individuals in the United States is extremely high, and this is creating big problems for the U.S. economy and for the budget, because very often those loans were guaranteed by the government, and that, of course, affects public finance. We fully understand that, and we will work very cautiously in this regard. There is a growing trust in our banking system. Over the past year, deposits in banks have grown by almost 25%, and because of lower inflation, depositors today are less worried about the buying power of their savings. The deposits by individuals amount to 12.5 trillion rubles, or 22% of the GDP. In order to make the Russian financial and commodity markets more competitive, a number of important steps have been taken. For example, the exchanges MMVB and RTS have been merged, and this has created preconditions to create in Russia one of the biggest international exchange platforms that will shape the prices for Russian assets and resources. We have done some other important things in this regard too. A law has been adopted on the central depository, which is in effect since January 1st, 2012. A law to counter inappropriate use of inside information and market manipulation, a law on clearing and clearing activities, and on And those laws create a very serious and well-functioning system for our financial institutions. We also have started the transition of Russian companies to mandatory publication of financial reports according to international standards. I believe that it's important to take another step to expand the resource base of the national financial system. By 2015, the pension savings in Russia may amount to 4 trillion rubles. That's about $125 billion. Some of those savings will be invested in long-term, reliable obligations to finance infrastructural projects. We will take steps to guarantee the value of pension savings. We understand that infrastructural projects will work for years and decades in the country. They will never disappear, but it's also important to improve the yield from those obligations, and we will only take appropriate decisions when both are guaranteed. We are ready to provide for investors not only a new quality of the financial, transport, and energy infrastructure. We are currently developing a fundamentally new Eurasian market with a new configuration and with gigantic prospects. Russia is proposing integration projects in Eurasian space that are unprecedented in terms of pace and scale. Integration is the most important source of development and growth. You know that a treaty on a zone of free trade in the CIS has been signed. Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus are working within the framework of the customs union and a common economic space populated by 170 million people with a high level of education, professional competence, and growing incomes. Within the G3 of Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, we are moving toward closer integration. For the first time in the post-Soviet space, we have a functioning supranational body that has management authority, the Eurasian Economic Commission. We're planning to transfer to the Commission the function of coordinating macroeconomic policy, technical regulation, and also measures relating to competition and natural monopolies. We expect that the quality of decisions in this regard will significantly grow, and both national and international business will feel the benefits of integration throughout the Eurasian space. Finally, Russia will become this year a fully fledged member of the World Trade Organization. The accession to WTO, the removal of many barriers to trade, will bring a new quality of investment and will significantly change business development strategy. In investing their capital in new production in the territory of Russia, the investors will be able to look not only at the Russian markets, but at international markets as well. Particularly, of course, the European markets. Despite all problems faced today by our friends and colleagues in Europe, the European market is still one of the most attractive in the ones in the world. The openness and the integration in international economic processes is certainly our choice. We did not abandon that strategy during the time of crisis. We will not abandon it. We will not change it now. We will also intensify efforts for Russia's accession to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. I believe that Russia could become a member as early as 2014. We will also work vigorously and participate substantively in the discussion of the future rules of world trade. Let me emphasize that we need to remove barriers not only to trade, but also to mutual investment, to implementing major transnational projects related to asset swaps and technology exchanges. We are open to such projects and to inflow of international investment, even in our strategic sectors. But the flow of capital should be mutual, should be reciprocal. Unfortunately, sometimes we see situations when Russian companies that are ready to invest in foreign assets face a wall. Mutually acceptable deals do not take place because of artificial pretexts that have nothing to do with economics. And this is very far from partnership. We are not looking for artificial preferences for our business abroad. We want an equal approach. We want equal treatment so that Russian investors could freely buy foreign assets as part of honest competitive procedures using their competitive advantages without any discrimination. I believe that free movement of investment between countries, just like free trade, could become a catalyst of economic growth despite the current difficulties of the global economy. And together, collectively, we should effectively use this development driver, this engine of growth. Of course, the prospects of global development depend not only on economics. It's very important to attune the mechanisms of governance to the interests of the people, to involve the people in shaping the national agenda in addressing key tasks. This is a strategy that's important for the effectiveness and authority of government in any country, and of course in Russia. The model of governance at all levels, federal, regional, and municipal, should be in conformity with the new quality of our civil society. Civil society that has grown as a result of a decade of stable economic growth in our country. This is a healthy process of development. We fully understand that without a mature civil society, we will not be able to build a modern economy. And the state must move toward the society to be open to dialogue. It is only on this basis that it's possible to assure mutual trust and stable development without upheaval and without dead ends, without dead-end conflicts. I am convinced that a democratic political system should guarantee not only the legitimacy of the government, but also people's confidence in the justice of the government. The interests of a majority should, of course, be provided for, but the interests of a minority should be taken into account and reasonably protected. Within this logic, we have dramatically simplified the procedures for the registration of political parties. Now, very different political and social forces can legally advance their views and convictions, and in addition to this, the citizens of Russia will be able to actively participate in the legislative process, not only delegating their powers to parliament, but also to initiate legislation. Any public initiative that will gather at least 100,000 authorized signatures on the web will have to be submitted to the federal parliament for consideration. We'll continue to perfect the mechanisms of our democracy using also the modern technologies of outsourcing. The task of any transformation is to create a new quality of life for people, new possibilities for the people, security and confidence in the future. And that means that everyone, let me emphasize, everyone who wants to go into politics, everyone who regards himself or herself as a politician, should express their position within the framework of the law. The yearning for change is, of course, a driver of progress, but it can become counterproductive and even dangerous if it results in ruining civil peace and in destroying the state. We should understand what in our political system can and must be improved, and which values and institutions are so fundamental and so important for the state that they cannot be revised, cannot be changed in any way. As part of open discussion and dialogue with all political forces in our country, we must develop a common answer accepted by an overwhelming majority of Russian citizens, answer to the question about a model of democracy and development, a national model of democracy and development that will effectively work in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, we have formulated a problem of ambitious changes for years ahead. We have everything to achieve these goals. Talented and well-educated people, political will, and the resolve to change the situation for the better, a resolve to change our country. And what's most important, we understand our responsibility to our citizens, to future generations. We're not postponing anything for the future. We are acting here and now. Some people may think that we should have acted more effectively. Some people are telling us not to hurry too much, but we are moving forward and we will continue to move forward. And I am sure that we will create a strong, open, and prosperous Russia. We welcome everyone who are ready to work in partnership with us. Thank you very much.